Shadow Education Secretary Angela Rayner. You might be relieved to know we didn't just talk about Brexit. Instead, I started by asking about the government's plans to tackle the crisis in teacher recruitment.
Successive Conservative secretaries have increased the workload for teachers, cut the funding to our schools and have had 6 consecutive years of not meeting their teacher recruitment crisis targets. So we know that there's a problem in our schools and it's a problem of their own making. I'm just pleased they've now started to listen, but I do think it's a little rich to say that school leaders have been the problem in terms of flexible working when actually we've seen the numbers of teachers reduced and cuts to our schools, which has left us with hardly any support staff and the means to which we can educate our children.
At the same time, though, the OECD says that the UK spending on primary and secondary education is some of the highest in the G7. That's as a proportion of GDP. So the cuts can't have been that bad, can they?
Well, they have, and actually we've seen that we've been slipping as per GDP on that OECD. We're not actually putting as much into education in real terms as we used to, and that's really important because as we look at the Brexit situation and leaving the European Union, we have to start skilling up our own workforce, and many businesses have been telling me that at the moment they need those education establishments to be giving our children the resources for the future, and at the moment that's not happening, and our schools are saying that, you know, standards, they want to continue to give that good standard, and many teachers and support staff work extremely hard for our young people. But when you don't have the money for books, when you're having to lay off staff and make them redundant, and when teachers are having to leave because they can't, you know, sustain their own work-life balance, then we've got a real crisis happening in our education system.
I want to talk about your own plans for education, because what you said at party conference last September is that a child's early years are those which make the greatest impact on a child's life. So why is it then that Labour is planning to spend twice as much money on scrapping tuition fees as it is on early years, Sure Start and childcare?
Well, I'm absolutely proud of our record in government on early years. We created the Sure Start programme. In fact, I was one of the people that actually, benefited from that when I had my son at 16. And I think it's really important that we do invest in early years, and we have put additional funding into early years. The government has cut Sure Start funding. We've lost over 1,200 Sure Start programmes across the UK, and that's devastating. And we've also seen that the 30 hours of free childcare that the government promised has not been being able to be delivered by the private providers because they're not funding it adequately. We've got to make sure that our early years is funded successfully, because that's really where you can make the biggest impact on social mobility and ensure that every child can do well.
You see, that's the point, though, isn't it? You talk passionately about it. I understand it. You get it. You understand that early years is the time that you can really make a difference to the child's life. So what I'm trying to understand is why Labour is spending just £5.3 billion on childcare, early years and Sure Start, and £11.2 billion on scrapping university tuition fees and maintenance grants, when all the evidence suggests that if you want to tackle social mobility, you've got to target children younger than when they go to university. Is it because if you were in charge, you'd be doing things differently?
Well, we've made sure that the early years programme that we have would make sure that every 2 to 4 year old would get the 30 hours of free childcare regardless of their circumstances, which is different to the Conservatives, because the children that need it the most will get that support. We did say that we would scrap tuition fees and we would bring back maintenance grants and maintenance support. And I think that's fundamentally important, because our National Education Service will be free at the point of need and will be there for every single person to use. I think that will transform Britain. I think it's a really good thing. I think it speaks to our values. So not only will we make sure that the early years is there to support people at the start of life, but we will make sure lifelong learning and education is free for all when they need it.
Do you really think that scrapping university fees will transform Britain? Because according to the IFS, it's the high-earning graduates who will benefit the most from that policy. Lots of people would see it as just a bung for middle-class kids.
Well, it's not. I think, you know, coming from a working class background myself, I had the opportunity to go to university for free if I wanted it. I think we all benefit from people who go to university and get good jobs and get skilled workforce. We need that going into our economy in the future. I think it's an important value that we have, and it does make an impact on our young people if they're having to leave university in £57,000 of debt. And of course, it's those that need the maintenance support that come away from university with with the biggest amount of debt. I think that's really scary for our young people. I think it's the wrong thing for the government to do. And the government will say most of that tuition fee's never paid off. But if you're that young person having that saddled round your neck for all those years, I think that's really upsetting for them. I think it's a value that we can afford. I think it's the right thing to do. And it's what Labour will do when we get into power.
Now, we have to talk about Brexit, of course. This week, MPs are going to be voting on a series of amendments. One of them could be the Yvette Cooper amendment, which effectively seeks to rule out no deal by delaying Brexit if MPs can't reach agreement. So I'd really appreciate a clear answer on this, because people are really worried about what's happening with Brexit. Will Labour back that Yvette Cooper amendment?
Labour will do whatever it takes to avoid a no-deal Brexit. So if that's the only option that we have, then it's something we will seriously consider. I want Theresa May genuinely to listen to Parliament and to reach a consensus. She hasn't budged on any of her red lines at the moment. I think I was as clear as I possibly can be. What we've said is we've put our amendment down. Let me be as clear as I possibly can be for the people that are listening to this programme. We've put our amendment down. We've said we've respected the result of the referendum. We want to find a deal. We want a customs union. We want protection for environment, consumer, employment. We've said that all along. Theresa May will not budge on her red lines. She's forcing us, trying to bully us into a no-deal scenario. We will do whatever it takes through Parliament to stop that no-deal scenario from happening. If that means backing an amendment, then we will do that.
OK. Now, the frontbench's own amendment puts the option of a second referendum on a table. But recently, your party chairman, Ian Lavery, has said that asking the voters to vote again on an issue they've already given an answer on until they come up with the right answer risks serious damage to the relationship between many citizens and politicians at Westminster. So I'm interested in your own view on this. What do you think having a second referendum, or Labour backing a second referendum, would do to democracy?
Well, our conference motion was very clear, and we said we wouldn't rule that out. But let me be clear. I think that if we end up in a second referendum, then us as politicians has failed the public. We failed to be able to do our job. I will see that as a really difficult situation for us all to be in. I don't think people want to see a delay in Article 50. I don't think people want to see us in a second referendum. They want to see parliamentarians working together to carry out what happened in the result of the referendum, to get the best possible deal we can for Britain moving forward. And the only way we can do that next week is by Theresa May actually genuinely working across Parliament and looking at her red lines and seeing how she can build that consensus. I still think that can happen, but Theresa May has to be willing to put her own views aside and to work with Parliament. And for the last 2.5 years, unfortunately, she's not been willing to do that. I hope she does now next week.
How would you vote if there was another referendum? And do you think that Leave would just win again?
I would be really worried about a second referendum, to be honest. I don't think that people necessarily will expect the result that they get. I think, if anything, it'll be very narrow. And worst case scenario is it'll be a very narrow Remain, and then what, we're going to have the best of three. I think it would be really difficult for the UK to be in that situation. You know, like I say, I respect the result. I probably would vote Remain. I would probably vote Remain, and the reason I'd vote Remain is I've seen over the last 2.5 years all the analysis that we've got at the moment, and you know, we're in the European Union, we get benefits of being part of the European Union, and I believe that would be the right thing for the UK. I believe that at the start of this process when I made my first vote, and I still believe that to be the case. But I also believe in democracy, and people made a decision. Now, I've heard people say, well, they were lied to, etc. Well, you know, I've pulled Damien Hines up 5 times in terms of his dodgy stats, and you know, every manifesto you only get half of it implemented normally. So you know, there is always mistruths, as we'd say, in Parliament, and you know, I understand that people's frustration, but I really don't see that the UK has moved significantly away from where they were originally on that original decision. So I think Parliament has just got to get on with it now.